like everybody, to, well, kind of on the road with Auntie Dem and kind of not. So here's the situation for this summer. I actually, believe it or not, do have to have a day job because not being Anita Sarkeesian and not having exactly a feminist frequency, big corporations like Intel are not exactly lining up to push hundreds of thousands of dollars in my direction. So yes, I do actually have to have a day job, which does explain the glacial pace of my blog entries and basically of my podcast too. But recently I did end up getting a new day job, which starts in August. And when I went in to tell my boss at my current job that I was leaving and given her the appropriate amount of notice, she basically said, "No, you're done. Get out of here right now." I thought I was going to be kept on for those extra few weeks until the new job started. Turned out not. Well, as anyone who has been following my blog knows, I ran into some real financial trouble last summer, and really had to reach out and beg for donations from my listeners, and thank you all very much, those of you who responded to that. But this summer, I was actually in a lot better financial place as far as, having not a whole lot of money, but, a little bit saved up. So with 6 weeks on my hands with nothing to do with them, I decided I was going to hit the road for the great old American road trip. And what I did was, I'm going to be doing a kind of a U-shaped pattern, a U-turn shaped thing where I started out in the San Francisco Bay Area, went to lovely Las Vegas for a whole week, where I actually recorded another podcast, which is going to be out soon. Then from Vegas to Dallas, Dallas to Tampa, where I am right now, spending a couple weeks in Tampa with some relatives, turning around in about another week or so, going north up to the Washington, D.C. area, where I'm going to be staying with Psycho Dish for an evening, and we're probably going to have a little whiskey-fueled recording there. Then up to upstate New York, where I'm going to be staying for another couple days, and then I'm going to be taking a northern route back to California. And I am going to be recording shows all along the way. I do actually have a couple of them in the stack, which I really, really ought to get to editing and posting. But you know what it's like. You get around relatives and days fill up and you just don't get to it. But I decided to record this one. I actually came in to a nice quiet area of the house, turned off the fan for extra audio quality, and sitting here late at night to tell you about the new Ghostbusters movie that I went to. So I listened to the Beckloff's podcast last night, his live stream from Saturday night, and he said, "Oh, no, nobody should go out and give this movie any of its money." Well, okay, I've got a little bit of an excuse, because you guys know what it's like going out to movies with a group of relatives. You got to find something that everybody can watch. One person will go nuts if there's any boobs. Somebody else will go nuts if there's any violence. Ghostbusters was at least a middle choice. And besides, I had thought about maybe doing a review of it anyway. I recall when I was a little kid, I used to, and this goes back to a blog post I did a while back called Follow the Lady, if any of you had read that, where when I was a kid, my dad used to take me over to Washington Square Park in New York a whole lot, and we would watch these street performers that would, do all kinds of acts there. And there was one, and this is years ago, back in the 80s, I have no idea where this dude is now. There was one called the Fireman. And he used to do fire tricks, fire breathing and all that. And his tagline every time he would do one of these tricks was, "I'm setting myself on fire for your fucking amusement." Well, that's kind of one of the reasons I agreed to go to Ghostbusters, which I will hereinafter refer to as Grrlbusters, to differentiate it from the classic 80s movie that was part of my childhood growing up, and I'm sure if you're of an appropriate age, yours too. Now, of course, this movie's gotten a lot of criticism for a lot of reasons, from just being unduly feminist to being gratuitous to being just plain bad. Well, now I'm in a position to talk about it a little bit. Now, one thing I should say is, I am an absolute connoisseur of so bad it's good movies. I mean, seriously, I think probably, okay, if you talked about the movie that I have seen the most number of times in a movie theater, that would be Return of the Jedi, which is 17 times. Saw it 13 times in 1983, and another 4 times in 1997 for the special edition. And I will go back to that movie any old time you want. But if you talk about movies that I have seen the most number of times and you include video, it would probably be Birdemic Shock and Terror. And if you've never seen that movie, it is a wonderful piece of so bad it's good. So I will go see that, or something like The Room, or Troll 2, or anything like that, any old time. I love those movies. You know, and especially me and Count Nothingface of the Caligula's Council podcast. That's one thing he and I have in common, is we love those so bad it's good movies. All right, so I figured I'd be able to bring you, some kind of amusing Angry Joe style rant about this movie, but the truth is, it's not even so bad it's good. I can't even really do that. So this is probably going to end up being a shorter podcast than I thought it was going to be, but I did want to get it out there and talk about it a little bit. The word that comes to, well, there's a couple words that come to mind with this. One of the words that comes to mind is meh. This is an absolute meh movie. It's really not as horrible as I feared it was going to be. On the other hand, it is not good. It is really forgettable, is the way I would put it. This is the kind of movie that for the next 30 years is going to be a staple of basic cable at 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday. Kind of the way that the Matrix sequels were, and for the same reason. The Matrix sequels were these sort of low energy, low effort cash-ins that, here's the thing. The kind of bad movie that upsets me isn't the movie that's just bad. It's the movie that could have been so much more than it was. And the Matrix sequels, of course, are that kind of movie. And while they're not as egregiously bad as something like the Star Wars prequels, in a way I actually kind of think they're worse. Because here's the thing. At least with the Star Wars prequels, I know what George Lucas was trying to do. He was trying to create something epic and amazing and memorable. He just botched the execution. He just couldn't follow up on it. But it was a good basic story, as evidenced by the Clone Wars CGI TV series, which, it's hit and miss. I'll give it that. But if you take the top 50 episodes, or the top 50%, well, they're the same thing because there's about 100 episodes. But if you take the top half of the Clone Wars episodes, that is some of the best Star Wars storytelling that has ever been done in any medium at all. And I will say the same thing for Rebels, which in fact is much more consistent than the Clone Wars was. So what upsets me really is this idea of this movie could have been more than it was. And of course, when you have material like the original Ghostbusters, which you're trying to go back and remake, of course, this movie could have been a lot more than it was. It just came across as something that nobody cared about, except to make a political point. That's the only reason that this movie exists. If it was an impressive movie with a bad message, I could have a kind of respect for it. If it was a bad movie like the Star Wars prequels, that at least had some real ambition behind it, that at least wanted to tell a big, amazing story, I could also have some respect for it. But this, again, nobody cared about making a good movie here. So lots of people will tell you, bad jokes, bad performances. And again, other than one queef joke, which just, no thank you. Other than that, there was nothing aggressively bad about Ghostbusters. It was just listless, unambitious, totally the kind of thing that plays 100 times a week on basic cable. And that's everything from the jokes to the performances to even the special effects. The special effects I noticed as soon as they had their opening scene. And pardon me for a second, I actually did bring a little bit of a tipple with me this evening. I'm trying to quit drinking, but, the Ghostbusters movie will drive you to drink, if anything will. So I splurged on a little bit of Bekharovka, which is some wonderful herbal liqueur made in, well, not Czechoslovakia anymore, the Czech Republic. Absolutely wonderful. I first had it at the bar Henry's, right there on the first floor of the Durant Hotel in Berkeley, California. Didn't know what it was, ended up just ordering it on a recommendation. It's fantastic. It's basically, it has this wonderful strength. It's like somebody gave you a mouthful of black licorice and then maced you. So here's to you. I'm going to drink a little of it right now in the spirit of the True Capitalist Radio broadcast. And Johnny Walker, Blue Label, oh yeah. Ooh. Burns so good. Okay, so the first scene, right, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but what I noticed about the very first scene was the whole movie, including the special effects, has this weird mid to late 90s look to the whole thing. Everything from how it's shot, to the color palette, to how the effects looked, it all really reminded me of one of the Joel Schumacher Batman movies, which is kind of bad because it basically makes the movie look 20 years out of date the day it was released. And it's certainly one of those movies where, 15 years from now when people watch it, they'll be like, hey, what year was this released? Really? 2016? Wow, that looks like something from like 1997. And it really does. And that's another example of sort of the low energy around this whole thing. There was a lot of stuff missing from it, like attention to detail. Among the things that the original Ghostbusters was it was a great New York movie. There are some great classic New York movies out there, and Ghostbusters is one of them. And what grated on me as someone who grew up in the greater New York area was just little things like the person on the team who was supposed to be the expert on New York, who knows everything about everything, doesn't even say street names in the right order. Any real New Yorker knows that the format for saying location names in New York City is first the street name, then the avenue name. 34th and 7th. It's never 7th and 34th. It's an informal custom, but it's one of those customs that keeps people from getting confused, right? And everyone in New York knows this. Well, of course, they screwed that whole thing up through the whole thing, and I know that's a tiny little nitpick. But when you're used to a movie that gets everything right, every little nitpick in a movie that gets something wrong grates on you. And that's something that did grate on me. But beyond that, Ghostbusters had heart. It really did. It had a lot of things that it was and that it did well. Yes, it was a great New York movie. It was also a great movie about what it's like to start and run a small business. And I've heard this from a lot of people who've run small businesses, which is, Ghostbusters, for all of its sort of supernatural stuff that obviously isn't from this world, it really gets what it's like to run a small business down. Things like, how you're gonna screw up sometimes. How you've got to try and promote your business, deal with customers, deal with regulations. It is something worth noting that in this version, that whole thing of being a small business gets very downplayed. They start off with everyone working at what one assumes is government-funded schools, and the movie ends with the new Grrlbusters getting government funding for their future experiments. So basically, instead of going out and starting a small business, they get Title IX affirmative action funding, and that's it. And that will tell you a couple of things about the female approach to running something as opposed to the male approach. The male approach is, hey, let's go out and start a small business. Well, that's opposed to getting money from Big Daddy Government, which, sorry, is not the same thing. The original Ghostbusters was also a great buddy movie, and it had a really nice balanced cast of characters, all of whom managed to stand out. And especially a lot has been said about Winston in that movie, how he was the level-headed everyman, as opposed to these three, kind of crazy dudes and how he brought a balance to the team. And that really shows up in the real Ghostbusters cartoon, which was absolutely brilliant, especially for its first couple of seasons. But it shows even in the movie, too. And here, the characters are just either super bland or really unpleasant people that you wouldn't want to spend 10 minutes in a room with. Especially the character of Holtzman, who, comes across as looking and acting like Lori Petty in Tank Girl, and there's another aspect of this movie getting stuck in the mid-90s. So is this movie funny? No, it's not really funny. And, I've thought about why it's not funny. It's too easy to just say women aren't funny. Well, there is a case to be made for that. And look, yes, obviously, Naxalt, there are exceptions. Yeah, Lucille Ball, yeah, Carol Burnett, we understand there have actually been funny women objectively throughout entertainment history. But yes, men are probably on average funnier than women. However, I think it's just too easy to dismiss this as saying it fails because women aren't funny. From everything I understand about the movie Bridesmaids, which was brought to you by most of the same people, it actually was pretty funny. So the question is, why was Bridesmaids funny when Ghostbusters isn't? And I think there is a reason for that. The reason is that people are funny about the things that they know. You can't be funny about something if you don't know it, because you can't really hit its foibles otherwise. Now, Bridesmaids was a female movie. It just was. It dealt with things that women do, that women care about, that women feel. And when you know that, you can be funny about it, which is why it was funny. It was a bunch of women making jokes about female experience, whereas Ghostbusters, that is such a guy movie. It is from beginning to end, and it was a terrible, terrible choice for someone to try to make this feminist movie out of. Where it fails most often is that it doesn't succeed at poking fun at the experiences that are at its core, because the experiences that are at the core of Ghostbusters are mostly male experiences. And the whole idea of being transgressive and having women take over those experiences and occupy those experiences means that it's women making jokes about things that they really don't know a whole lot about, which means that they totally fall flat because they never hit the mark. You can't hit a mark if you don't know where it is. Pardon me while I take another sip of Bekkerovka here. It's good stuff, let me tell you. All right. So, here's the thing. Where this movie falls the flattest is in the fact that in trying to be cut-rate versions of men, the women act not like women act and not like men act, but like women think that men act. Like the fart jokes, the queef joke. Well, yeah, women think, of course, men sit around with each other and make jokes about farts all day. Yeah, that's what they do. Well, no, that's really not what they do. They'll haze and joke with each other as kind of a bonding experience, but that's a part of male friendship that's not a part of female friendship, and that females don't really quite understand. Though even that's not quite exactly true. Here's the thing. A woman who was married and had sons would understand. Because there's a woman who's around men all the time, who sees men as they are, when they're on their guard, when they're off their guard, every single day of her life. So she gets a really, really close, intimate picture of how men work, how men act, which Sex and the City, feminist, rootless, cosmopolitan, childless, unmarried women are not going to have. So they are not going to have an accurate picture of how men act. One of the ways that this comes through is in the portrayal of the receptionist, played by Chris Hemsworth. Let's compare that to the portrayal of Janine, played by Annie Potts, in the original Ghostbusters. Now, Janine was a valuable member of the team. She was maybe a little ditzy here and there, but she did know what she was doing. She grounded the guys. She kept them going in a straight line. She took care of all the important stuff that they were frankly a little bit too irresponsible to deal with themselves. She did something really important, and they never portrayed her as a blithering idiot who just was completely useless. Yeah, she was a little bit sexy, especially in the cartoon, but she was never just a dumb sex object, which is exactly what Chris Hemsworth is here. And again, it's this female projection of what they think males act like, coming back onto themselves as they try to be some kind of imitation of men, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work in real life when women try and do things that men do. It doesn't work in the movies. It doesn't work when it's serious. It doesn't work when it tries to be funny. Falls flat all the time. Because the thing is, women are really, really good at being women, and they're really, really bad at being men. So I'm going to say the absolute impermissible thing here, that thing that nobody can ever possibly say, which is, women should really kind of stick to being women. They should really stick to doing the things that women do well, that nature prepared them for, that culture eked out for them as their niche, just as there's a niche for men. They shouldn't try and cross those lines, because it never really works out right. Yeah, it could work out more disastrously, as it has in our culture at large, and Ghostbusters is not exactly going to bring the world down on its own, although as part of a greater body of ideas that constantly get flashed at young women, showing them what the cultural Marxist elite think they ought to do, yes, it is extremely damaging. But the truth is, on its own, all that Ghostbusters does is just fall flat, and it doesn't really understand why. But in a way, Grrlbusters is the ultimate comment on feminism, because it really does show what the problem with it is, what the limitations of it are, how unnatural it is. And yes, it tried to be ideological, and yes, it fell flat at that, but, in the end, frankly, this movie, more than anything else, it's just forgettable. People are just going to blast past it, and you could ask why. You could say, well, would this have been a bigger hit in a different year? Because let's be honest, 2016 is the year of the resurgent right, everywhere, globally. It is the year that the right has come back in a new and different form, and I always knew it would. After Nixon was driven out of office, a lot of people thought the Republican Party was just dead, that conservatism was just dead, that it wasn't ever going to come back. Well, it did. It went into the wilderness for only actually, 6 years, and reinvented itself, 4 years, because Ford was president for a couple of years. And it reinvented itself, and it came back with Reagan. And I always knew that it was going to do that after recovering from the Bush years. And so far in 2016, boy, has it ever done that. And yes, it's been a troubled year, but let's look at where that's going, where it has gone. The Brexit vote, the reversal of the election in Austria, I would say even Erdogan's defeat of the coup attempt in Turkey was another example of the right rising. And we have yet to see where it will go in terms of Trump, but it seems like the left is determined to say, we're going to make this 1968 again. Well, okay, but who got himself elected president that year? Pardon me, time for another sip of Bekkerovka. Good stuff. All right, so would Grrlbusters have done better in 2008 or 2012? I kind of don't think it would have. This goes back to a column I wrote about a year ago called Never Write a Christian Novel, where I was talking about how if you start out with a message at heart first, you're going to fail to make a movie or book or whatever that effectively delivers that message. What you've got to do is first set out to tell a great story. And the thing is, a good message is the truth. So all you have to do is tell a story that tells the truth about life, the universe, the human condition, and your message will come through in the end. And since Christianity is true, just tell a true story, and it will end up being a Christian story. And I actually have another blog post planned for pretty soon to explain how Pulp Fiction is actually the greatest Christian movie that has ever been made. And once you read it, you're going to see, because it was a story that told the truth. And that's really all you have to do. Ghostbusters was a story that set out to deliver a political message that wasn't the truth, and it also fell into the trap of the polemical movie, which is, it falls into what Vox Day identified as the trap of social justice convergence, which means that the more that anything's purpose is to deliver a social justice message, the less that it will be able to deliver what its stated intended purpose is. The more a game or a book or a movie is dedicated to the idea of social justice, the less it's just going to be there to tell a good story. To the degree that Grrlbusters succeeds, it succeeds because it's piggybacking off of what was already a great story. To the degree it fails because its social justice converged, and it's just as if nobody cared about anything else but delivering the message. That, more than anything else, is why this movie just ended up being a forgettable nothing, something that people won't even think about in a year or two from now. It's going to be that kind of movie that's going to be on basic cable, playing as background noise as you sit there paying your bills. That's all it's ever going to be, and that's all it deserves to be. It would actually have been better for this movie if it was just outright terrible. At least that way it would be MST3K/riff tracks worthy. At least that way it would be worth watching for laughs on a spare evening when you want to do a so bad it's good movie. But it's not even that. It's just meh. It's just forgettable. It's just bland. It's just blah. Which is a real shame, because Ghostbusters is a great franchise and it deserves so much more. I've actually heard rumors that there is a second possible reboot of Ghostbusters in the works, and I really hope that works out. There are certain franchises like Ghostbusters, and I would argue like The Matrix, that actually deserve to have a good reboot, and I would love to see it happen. Now, whether Hollywood will actually do it, I don't know. I don't put a lot of faith in them for obvious reasons. Alright, and as I get ready to go, here's the third shot of Bekharovka. As I get a little lightheaded and the microphone seems to move just a little bit. Vasha Zdrovia. Alright. Well, thanks for joining me. I know this was a little short. Again, I hope to make this a nice long comedic rant podcast. But there's not all that much to say. It was a meh movie, and I had a meh time at it, and I produced a meh podcast about it. There are a couple podcasts that I actually had in line before this that I recorded on the road that I have yet to edit. One of them is about how Las Vegas is really the ultimate libertarian town in every possible good way, and also in every possible bad way. The other one I'm calling A Motorist's Guide to the End of Western Civilization, and both of those will be coming relatively soon. I've got them recorded. I just have to get around to doing the editing on them and all of that. I promise they'll be out soon. So yes, this is a little bit out of order. You're getting this before two podcasts that were actually recorded before it, but I figured I would strike while the iron's hot, because frankly, everybody's going to forget about this movie in a week or two, and then this podcast will be completely irrelevant. So anyhow, thanks for tuning in. More podcasts to come soon. Keep listening for more On the Road with Anti-Dem, and I'll be seeing you somewhere down the road.